What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Brody Frye. This is the Mind Hiking Podcast. And tonight, I couldn't sleep. I was staring at the ceiling. It's the middle of the night. Actually, this time, I know I like to say that, but I'm not a night owl, I promise. I just can't sleep. It's extreme insomnia. Really bad. My brain doesn't shut off. But yeah, couldn't shut my mind off, so I got a lot of thoughts in my mind, a lot of stuff stirring around in my head, like usual, but it's particularly active tonight. So I'm going to share some thoughts with you guys, and hopefully you guys enjoy that. We're going to be focusing specifically around dimensions, but I got a lot to say. So and I already recorded it, so I'm doing the opener after. So I couldn't sleep, got out of bed, came right here, turned on the mic, and started recording right away. So I didn't get a chance to, I didn't want to lose my train of thought by recording this opener first. So here we are. So hopefully you guys enjoy, and we'll see you soon. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Brody Frye, and here we dive deep into difficult questions. We'll map out thoughts, theories, and crazy ideas for the love of knowledge and growth. So, how do we answer some of the mind's toughest questions? This is the Mind Hiking Podcast. This podcast is way too convenient. I feel like I'm one of those guys from one of those sci-fi movies where you see them, like, if they're stranded on a planet or something, or they're just, like, in their laboratory doing their, like, recordings. They're journaling, but it's, like, audio journals. They, like, leave their audio messages behind, and they're just, like, it's day 567. Today I whatever they say, or like what do they say in like Star Trek? It's like Captain's log, star date, whatever. I feel like that, but this is just so much more convenient than journaling. I do love journaling, like pencil and paper or pen and paper. I never really liked pencil because I'm a lefty and it smudges bad. But pen, if you get one that's good and dries fast, the gel ones are rough because it gets all over your hands. But yeah, if you got a fast drying pen, that's ideal for a lefty. Pen and paper. But I am finding that this podcast is very practical and very convenient because it's late at night. I was already in bed, but another one of those nights of staring at the ceiling, thinking about life and everything, and I feel a little bad, but rolled over, told Katie I love her, and I'm sorry, but I can't sleep. I'm going to go record an episode. So here I am. So I'm shut in here, but I'm going to try to still be a little bit more quiet, so sorry if the audio's a little quieter. I'm trying to stay pretty close to the mic here. But I've just been thinking a lot about a lot of topics, but I keep finding patterns between a lot of different topics. And I like when things click. And sometimes things click and then they change later. And I find that everywhere, but especially I find that in this podcast, I listen back and sometimes I hear some of the previous thoughts that I had and I'm like, that's different now. Or I find things that I say that are wrong, or things that I thought were right and make sense, but it's wrong. And especially like when I'm talking like theoretical physics. That's a tough subject, and there's a lot of theories that I throw out there on the podcast, and I progressively, like, I study this stuff all the time, and progressively I find answers, and then listening back to some old episodes, I listen to myself, and I'm close. I'm always so close, but it's just another cool thing about this podcast is where I can look back and see my growth, and find like, ooh, I was so close, or sometimes I'm listening and I'm like, oh wow, like, it just, like, hearing myself think of like an old idea sparks new ideas that I didn't think about, just hearing my past self say something. So lots of cool stuff. But I'm just thinking about dimensions again, because I like going back to that. I think about dimensions a lot, especially, everyone knows that I'm very interested in the subject of UFOs and aliens. Not so much for like the "are we alone" question, because at this point we all know that we're not, and the odds, like, you could just look from a odds perspective, like, it's yeah, just look at the odds. But I don't want to focus on that. It's more for the technology. The technology is what fascinates me. The ability to traverse hundreds of thousands or who knows, millions of light years, meaning the distance it takes light to travel in a year is a light year. That's an incredible amount of distance. And it's like our nearest galaxy outside of the Milky Way galaxy is the Andromeda galaxy, which is 2.5 million light years away. Insane. That's the next closest galaxy. And you can't even count how many galaxies there are. It's just insane. And how many like, I think people don't realize how big a galaxy even is. Like, we're just a small speck. Our solar system is just a tiny speck, like, in the bottom left corner of the Milky Way galaxy. It's just like, you can't, if you put the whole Milky Way galaxy into one photo, you couldn't even see our own solar system. Like, that's how, and that's just one galaxy of, like, countless it just, like, again, back to the odds thing. But to be able to travel that sort of a distance, like, that technology is what fascinates me. And, like, you think about becoming like an interplanetary species, and, like, the distance of these planets and stars and galaxies, and, like, how do you explore that? Like, that's such a small area that we're confined to. Like, on what, we can't even get off this rock. But there's so much out there. That technology is what I'm fascinated with. Like, the ability to go out there. Like, I hate being restricted in any way. I hate when people, like, laws and infringing on rights, and, like, every little thing. Like, if you tell me what to do, it's like that bothers me more than anything else. Just, like, being restricted, and being restricted to this planet, being restricted, like, another big issue that I talk about often is carrying a gun, my concealed carry. I carry a gun everywhere I go, and it bothers me when people tell me what I can and can't do. So I hate restriction. Just get off my back. If I'm not hurting anybody, leave me alone. If you're not hurting anybody, I don't care what you're doing. But the government wants to have fucking their fingers in everything you do. But anyways, sidetracked. But the dimensions, you hear it tossed around a lot, just being able to travel interdimensionally, like objects being able to travel interdimensionally. Like that's the latest like buzzword, I guess. Like these UFO craft, the UAP, whatever you want to call it. Stupid, but that's what the latest news is saying, UAP, even though that's an outdated acronym. They don't use that anymore, but just for pop culture reasons, UFO I'm going to stick with. But it's tossed around that they're interdimensional and that's how they can travel, and they phase in and out of this dimension. And I think people think about dimensions as if it's some like mythical like plane of existence. And there could be different planes of existence, but that's different from a dimension. People get that confused. And I think people also get confused about what it means to be interdimensional. Interdimensional travel, and like what a dimension is. Like planes of existence and things like that. We are interdimensional already. We have the capability to travel interdimensionally already, contrary to popular belief. We already can and do every single day. You are right now. Us existing already do this. A dimension is just a measurement. It's just a position. It's a position in space-time. And there's so much argument about what dimensions are and what's what, and everybody gets lost after the third dimension. They get lost after the third dimension, but they don't even know where to start because they start with like two-dimensional because that's all people know. People like pop culture only knows the second dimension, two-dimensional plane, like a piece of paper or your screen on your phone. And that's even argued as if it's a three-dimensional object because you can see three-dimensional objects on your phone screen, which you can't. People say like, oh yeah, well look, well how come I can see, like you can draw a cube on your phone screen, like that's three-dimensional. It's not. That's a two-dimensional depiction of a three-dimensional object. Your phone screen is two-dimensional. Piece of paper is two-dimensional. It's just an optical illusion with drawing that makes it look three-dimensional. It's two-dimensional. And three-dimensional is where we live and exist and move around, what we can perceive. And that's why we have two eyes, so we can have the depth perception instead of one eye. Which is probably why Cyclopses run into walls all the time, because they don't know how close it is. Just kidding, that's a joke I just made up. But anyways, people don't know where to start on that line. So I'm just going to start with the 0th dimension, and that is something that people might laugh at or joke around about. Like, is this a joke? But it's not. The 0th dimension is just a speck. It's just not even a speck because a speck has dimensions. The 0th dimension is something that is only where it is and has no ability to move any direction and has no measurable mass or volume. It's just where it is, and it's just one, for lack of a better term, speck. But it's not a speck because that still has dimension to it. So it's just like basically a point. But again, even a point has dimension. So it's just like nothingness in one singular spot. The first dimension is essentially a line, but it's not a line because a line also is two-dimensional. And this is the problem with trying to represent different dimensions within other dimensions, because I'm trying to explain to you what these dimensions are from a third dimensional point of view. So it's very difficult, but essentially it's a line, but not really, because the thickness of the line is two-dimensional. So that's, if you eliminate the thickness of the line and you think of it just as the ability to go left or right on an x-axis, just left or right. It's just the measurement of the x-axis to be able to go left or right. That's the first dimension. The second dimension is like a piece of paper. That's like a old Mario video game or something like that, where you're on a screen and you can move left or right, up, down. Or if you're on the table, like if you got a piece of paper on the table, you can draw a line up the paper, down the paper, left of the paper, right of the paper. You can draw whatever you want on that piece of paper, but it's always two-dimensional. It's always flat. You can only go in those four directions: up, down, left, right, like an old style video game. And that's why a screen is always two-dimensional as well. What we visualize, not the LEDs that are actually built in into the screen, but like the picture itself, the piece of paper. Now the third dimension is the dimension that we live in, and that's where controversy starts, because people will argue that we live in the fourth dimension. I'll get back to that, but we live in the third dimension, and you can go everything that the previous dimensions are capable of, and you can do everything and more. You can jump up, you can climb up, whatever. You can go down, you can go left, you can go right, and you can go forward, and you can go backwards. There's a depth axis. So now you got X, Y, and Z axis. So that's where we exist right now. And if you notice a pattern here, the ability, your reference in space-time is doubled of what the dimension you're existing in is. I don't know if you guys have noticed this pattern yet, but it's always double. You're gaining 2 to every one dimension you have. So every single dimension you have, your ability to position yourself in space-time is doubled. So like the second dimension, or the first dimension, you have an ability to place yourself with 2 options, either left or right. distance not mattering, but you have two options. You have the ability to move left or right. Second dimension, you have four options. You can go left, right, up, down. Third dimension, you have the ability to go left, right, up, down, forward, and backwards. So it's always double. That's 6 movement options, and it's the third dimension. Now, with that said, is where it gets challenging. People usually get lost after the third dimension. And this is the reason why the biggest argument is that the fourth dimension is time. And I've talked about this being a possibility on the podcast previously. But it's another one of those things where I look back and I realize that I'm wrong. And I'm always finding myself being wrong. And that's why I don't take offense when people call me out on the podcast. Not that it happens often, but if I'm wrong, I don't care, because I'm always growing and changing, and I listen back, and even if it's like a couple weeks later and I listen back and I'm like, oh, that's wrong, or that's stupid, whatever, but is what it is. That's part of recording here on the spot rather than having a pencil and paper and I can just erase my notes and change it or whatever. But still, I like this better because I can more easily keep up with my thought speed, where like pen and paper, I lose track of where I'm at because I'm trying to focus on what I'm writing, and then my mind's going too fast, and then I lose it because I can't keep up with the writing. So this is nice. Like, for example, I wouldn't have been able to write that as fast as I thought that. But also, I'm thinking it faster than I can say it too, because saying it takes too much time as well. So maybe in the future there'll be a faster way to put information down. Maybe you can go at the speed of thought one day and you can just think things into a database, which would be pretty interesting. Another side note, another crazy idea that just goes through my head randomly. But people think that, sorry, I forgot exactly where I was at, but I'm just going to continue here. People think that time is the fourth dimension. That's the biggest pop culture argument. And here is why that's not true. I used to believe that because we have to have the time dimension to be able to exist, and we don't have control over it. So I actually did argue that I was partially right. I argued that we lived in the third dimension, but the fourth dimension existed, but we didn't have control over it. We didn't have the option to move freely in it. The time dimension, we're stuck in it under its will, where we can only progress. We can only go one way on the time axis. We can only go forward. Time is going forward. We are moving into the future, and that's it. We don't have freedom. We don't have time freedom. We can't go forward or backwards. So now, if you look at this, it's linear, just like a two-dimensional plane. Actually, no, it would be more like a one-dimensional plane. It would be like that, where you have the option to go left or right on the time axis. And that was one of my arguments, is that you could go forward and backwards in time if you lived in the fourth dimension, but we don't, so we don't have control over that. And then you can get into, if you think of like the rope theory, where if you see a piece of rope, it's just a one piece of rope, and you can move left or right on it. But then you zoom in on it and you realize that the rope is a bunch of strings coiled around each other. and you can go left or right on any of those strings, individual strings, which is like a different life path. And you can hop from one string on the same rope, but one string to another string, and they're all different life paths. And then you zoom in even more, and there's threads that make up those strings that make up that rope, and they're all different life paths that you can go left or right on. And then the fifth dimension being that you can coexist. You can jump and coexist, because like the fourth dimension is you can move backwards and forward freely on it. The fifth dimension being that you can jump from one to another. You can jump in a different timeline where you may have made a different decision. And then the sixth dimension being you can coexist. You can coexist in different dimensions. You can jump and simultaneously be in a different timeline while you're doing something else in another timeline. And that was one of my original thoughts, and it sort of makes sense, and who knows, this might be something that I go back on, because I got to put deeper thought into this, because this is a heavy one. But the reason I'm coming to the conclusion currently on this topic as to why that's not the case, why time isn't the fourth dimension, is because time exists in every dimension. So how can that be a measurable dimension on its own? You can't have any of the dimensions without time. A dimension is a spatial placement. It's like a dimension is like potential energy. Time is like kinetic energy. Time is always active. Time is always going in all dimensions. And dimensions are like potential energy because you have the option to move with time, because you can't move without time. Time has to take place for you to go from one point to another. And without time, even if you're in the first dimension, you can't go from left to right without time. So time exists in the first dimension as well. So how can time be the fourth dimension? Time is just the progression of spatial positioning. Your point in space-time. A dimension is just where you're at. Time is how that changes. When time passes, it's just the progression of change. So that can't be a dimension. So you have the fourth dimension. What is the fourth dimension then, if it's not time? I saw this one video of this kid trying to explain it. And he was like, and the fourth dimension is time. And similar to what I said, but kind of a more basic explanation. And then he says, you can visually represent the fourth dimension by a tesseract. And it's just like, and you can see him reading off of his notes. He keeps looking away from the camera, and I'm like, that guy, poor kid, has no idea what he's talking about. And because how does adding the potential for progression, adding progression, the potential is the movement of an object. How does adding progression, how does that form a tesseract? It doesn't. That was a gap in his understanding. That was a gap in two controversial theories that he stumbled across and tried to morph into one to cover his bases so he didn't look dumb, which he sounded smart probably to the vast majority of people, but people that understand this stuff will be able to understand that he doesn't know what he's talking about. But the typical person scrolling on TikTok is not going to catch that, and they're going to think that guy's a genius. And you can say any sort of words you want, and you can sound like a genius, but it's the understanding of it. And what's the point in throwing around fancy words if you don't understand it yourself? What's the point in looking smart if you don't understand? My passion is the understanding of. And the more you know you don't know. You open doors and you find more doors that you just got to keep opening. And it's like, it's never ending. And it's like being naive and not knowing is bliss, because it's just, you have no idea how much you don't know. And it's like, you feel like you know more the less you know. So the less you know about something, the more you think you know, because your frame of reference is so much smaller. There's so many less doors for you to open up when you're starting off. So it seems like I know so much because, look, there's only this much to understand. But then you open up one of them. Most people don't bother opening any of them. They just see a couple doors and they're like, okay, it's pretty basic. I understand it. But then they don't open up any doors. You open up one door and they multiply, and then they multiply. And then you got to backtrack, go back to the original couple doors and open all those. And then you got to dig into all directions. And it's just like infinite doors going all directions. And it's just like duplicates and multiples of doors on doors on doors with every door that you open. And it's just like the more you learn about something, the dumber you become, it seems. It's like, and then you look at the world around you and you're like, this is insane how people are walking around today, not even opening up the first door, thinking they know everything, and making decisions that affect other people without even opening a single door, just because it looks like it's easy to understand. It's just a wild, wild world we live in. Just ignorant people, and then you question them, and instead of them thinking, maybe he's right, maybe I should open one of these doors, maybe I should look into it a little bit more. No, their ego gets the best of them, and then they get upset about it. And that is the beauty of Satan's work. And that unfortunate ego programmed into us. And that's why the search of wisdom is power. And that's why a certain few are entrusted with wisdom. And that's why it's much better to ask for wisdom than any material thing. But there's a lot of responsibility that comes with the holding of wisdom. Again, that was a huge sidetracked. Great example of how my brain works. Just crazy mind here. It's just like, just goes. But this is what I would be staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night, not sleeping, thinking about. This episode is a perfect example of me not being able to sleep and staring at the ceiling and thinking about all of this stuff, which is crazy. Well, who thinks about this stuff? This is craziness. But back to the dimensions. I want to get back because I talked about that poor kid that was explaining dimensions and got totally sidetracked, but the Tesseract and how he said that time is the fourth dimension and it's visually represented by a Tesseract. Not true. That's impossible. It doesn't even make any sense at all. The fourth dimension is, in fact, visually represented by a Tesseract. And I'm not talking about the thing from the Marvel movies. What a Tesseract is you think about a two-dimensional square, then a three-dimensional cube. And that actually, if you take it even back further, a one-dimensional line, that would be a dimension of, that'd be the first dimension of a square type object. And then two-dimensionally, it would be a square. Three-dimensionally, it would be a cube, which is a three-dimensional version of a square. And then with all 90-degree angles. And then a fourth dimensional version of a square object is a tesseract. And what that is, people don't understand what that is. And I think most people can get it. Essentially what it looks like, search it up. That's your best bet. Search it. But don't search just a photo. Search like a GIF or like a video. Look up a video because it moves. You got to be able to see the movement of it to be able to visualize the fourth dimension. But again, this is extremely challenging because you're essentially using a two-dimensional surface to portray a fourth dimensional object. It's not right, but that's the best we got. Because you're using a phone screen with lines on it that are two-dimensional to represent a fourth dimensional object. So it's not right, but right now that's the best we got. But essentially what it looks like is a cube, like a big cube with a little cube inside of it, with all four corners of the little cube connecting outwards to the insides of the four corners of the bigger cube. 8 corners, I'm sorry. All 8 corners of that. Again, I'm thinking two-dimensionally, I'm sorry. But three-dimensionally, the cube inside of a bigger cube, all 8 of those corners connecting to the inside of the 8 corners of the bigger cube. And with an object like that, you take that inner cube and you can move it. Just imagine, just for our quick example, imagine moving that the outside cube stays stationary. The inside cube, just for this quick example, moves towards the right side of the outside cube. And as that's happening, the left side of the outside cube shrinks down to the same size as the inside cube. And with that happening, the farthest right side of the little inside cube expands to the size of the big cube. And then that all shifts so that big one on the right side moves over, and then the one on the far left, the one that just shrunk down, moves inwards to form the little cube again. So it looks the same. And then the outside cube looks the same too, because while that was happening, the outside line on the right side moves over to the left side also. So it can move in and out of itself. And now there is your answer. Again, that's a quick explanation. Please, please, please look up a video of this and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. But that's your fourth dimensional movement. That is the reason why time is not your fourth dimension, because you got in a tesseract, in fourth dimensional space time, you have your ability to move left, right, up, down, forward, backward, inward, and outward. That's the extra 2. That's your 8 dimensions of movement, or your 8 potentials for movement in your fourth dimension. So like I said before, it doubles. It's a doubling of the possibilities of movement, of spatial movement in a dimension is double of what the dimension you're in. So you're in a fourth dimensional tesseract, and the tesseract has the ability to move 8 different ways. And that's why time is not the fourth dimension, because time is not a spatial potential. It exists in all dimensions. So that just came to my mind while I was laying in bed and trying to sleep, and obviously could not sleep. So, and I think that's all I'm going to do for you guys today. I think I'm going to go to bed now. So if anything else comes to my mind, I promise I'll come back and do another one. So hopefully this was enjoyable for you guys. And I kind of like this style. I think I got a couple episodes like this, most of them bonus episodes, but I kind of like this speaking like it's a journal kind of episodes. Hopefully you guys are fascinated with this stuff too. And keep in mind, I'm learning and growing as I go too. So if I misspeak or say something stupid, or if I change my opinion in the future, that's a possibility as well. So please just keep an open mind and be kind. I really like that saying. So, and that is a quote by yours truly. I've never heard that anywhere else. And I said that like sort of as an accent in one of my episodes. And I was like, I kind of like that. So I plastered it all over my bio. So, yep. And now we're here. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'm going to go get some rest. Thanks for tuning in and supporting the podcast. I really appreciate it. Best way to help out the podcast, I don't have any ads or anything. Don't do any of that stuff at this moment. So the best way you can support it is tell somebody. If you have an episode that you really like, please share it, follow the podcast, and I love all your support, guys. So thank you so much. I'm going to go get some sleep. Rock on, and peace out.